So today we're going to be talking about creativity in the age of AI, but I think about myself as a learning scientist. And so one of the things that sort of connects us in the learning sciences world is our theories of learning, our theories of creativity. And you probably get overwhelmed because things are changing so fast. There's like a new application that's out, this other thing. And what does this mean? Maybe you thought about being in computer science, and then now you're thinking like, is that going to be a good major in college? And all of that that portion. So we have a high quality theory, it gives us a way to sort of move forward in all of that ambiguity. So I'm going to just kind of give you an introduction to creative theory and how we can apply it to AI so that you can kind of develop what I call like a lens. So that when you're looking at a new AI application or you're looking at a new app or any technology, you're going to be looking for these creative visions. So these are some images of some of the stuff that I've worked on. So in addition to the Scratch platform, I wanted to take all that computation off the screen into kind of our physical reality. So I do a lot of work with e-textiles and wearable textiles. And so this is a dancer that then could control the music and the cadence of music, right, through the embedded portions of their shoe. Think about things. How can this AI and sort of maker culture change sort of the big ideas? So maybe you learned about circuitry through a 9-volt battery and a little light bulb. But now we could actually teach circuitry through things like squishy circuits here and replace all the wiring with Play-Doh and have LEDs. And by kind of substituting those things out, we can actually increase the quality of learning. So in this study, we had kids that are in preschool that were on par with college students in their understanding of circuitry, which was really fun. And so when you get these new tools, you can actually change what's possible for learning and development. And so hopefully that excites you as you start to think about this intersection of design and technology and AI and education. And then I think really importantly, we're thinking about the future of work. So we want lots of cool things that you can explore in your K-12 experience, but how do we start to bring that innovation into the workforce as well? So there's a few things, the moment that we're in, it's accelerating fast, right? And so AI capabilities are evolving faster than policies or that your teachers or other people can keep up. And, so this kind of uncertainty isn't a phase, it's kind of the new normal. So how do you trudge forward and all of that? And so creative adaptation is what we see as like essential. So innovation increasingly depends on our ability to respond creatively, not just efficiently. I love this. This is the Harvard Business Review, and they've been sort of tracking year over year how people are using AI. And if you zoom in there, you'll see that the number one application used to be like generating ideas in 2024, and that's kind of dropped down to number five. And therapeutic or companionship applications are really the sort of the number one. And so I think whatever field you're in, if you're interested in health sciences, if you're interested in workforce, manufacturing, or you're interested in creative applications or the arts, AI is definitely going to be a large part of that. And so we think about creativity. It used to be kind of a nice to have or like a soft skill, but now it's actually going to be, I think, part of how to thrive in the age of AI, right? And so the ability to co-create and extending your mind with AI is sort of a new fluency of kind of knowing the right application, the right AI to kind of use for your portions. So we're going to use our theories of creative learning as an anchor, as I mentioned before. And so we want to be thinking about, um, uh, I like to look for theories that really anchor me. And so I'm gonna mention some that I think you might find interesting. These are all very accessible readings, I think. And so um, but as a parent, I'm a parent of high schoolers as well, and I value learning that grows from like curiosity, interest, and not sort of compliance to these things. So I think really have a healthy sense of questioning about these things. So theories help us ask what kind of learning do we want to protect and grow, even with AI in the room. And um, so the agency over automation. So if you're making something with a creative tool, do you feel like it's yours, right? And really kind of ask yourself, is it yours? And if you just made something in which you don't feel any agency over, any type of value of, that's probably a good indicator that that wasn't a good process, right? And so what went wrong? What didn't like? How did you not feel like it was something you produced, right? Expression. Did you get what you wanted out of it, or does this have the sort of the did the AI sort of wrangle you in a direction that doesn't isn't what you were trying to express, right? That co-construction over consumption. Sometimes, these AI pieces will spit out 5 pages of text, but you didn't go through a process of co-creating it together. So looking for tools that allow for these things. And some of the theories I think that you'll find interesting are Csikszentmihalyi's sense of flow. And so if this is of interest to you, it's sort of, we could get to this anxiety. And you were just talking about how having some folks in the room might actually be too much, right? And so it gets you to this anxious state and not in the sense of flow. And vice versa, when you're kind of understimulated or it's not very interesting, it gets to a sense of boredom, right? And so in this sort of creativity, this flow state, you're looking for this flow state where time just sort of disappears from you. And we've all had that experience sitting at the computer doing something where you just kind of get transported away. And maybe that's doom scrolling, but maybe it's also creating something or writing something or producing something or something in the makerspace. Another theory of learning that I really like is Mitchell Esnick's creative spiral. And so it starts with like imagining something, creating something, playing around with it, sharing, reflecting, and then starting that process over again. And this comes from our theories of constructionist learning. And so we want to think about kind of starting with what's in our minds, but externalizing it and creating something that shares our ideas, and then sharing it with the world. It could be online, could be with the person sitting next to you, could be with your family. Um, and then talking about it is the way that we refine and iterate over time. So there's some big things that we know about creativity. So, um, the first one, and we'll go a little bit deeper into these, but that creativity increases with exposure. And so exposure to multiple cultures, disciplines, perspectives. When you travel, that increases your creativity. When you read different books or different perspectives, right? And sometimes when you just stop and you say, hey, what are 50 different ways I could do this, right? That increases your creativity. We also know that creativity is malleable. It's not fixed. So don't think of yourself as a creative or a non-creative person. It's really a process that you engage in or not, right? And so you could always become more creative by just really pushing yourself in the ways that we'll talk about, but it's not fixed at all. And that play and curiosity drive that engagement. And so when you find yourself pursuing something, like just study yourself, when you do something again and again for like many hours, this could be making bracelets and beaded bracelets, if you're a part of the Taylor Swift touring group, so if you're a Swiftie, you could, you might spend many hours doing this. It could be, you just really like different word choices and you like to write plays, or you're in your maker space and you like to kind of just keep playing with your robots, right? But what do you do? Could be gameplay, could be Minecraft, could be all these things, but what drives your play and curiosity, right? You're asking yourself a question and, really think about, is that a medium that you want to explore? What is it that you're trying to better understand in that process? Collaboration enhances creativity. A lot of times we think about the best artists as working alone in their attic, and then they come out with something really wonderful. But that's not true. These artists actually, the most creative time points in all of history are because they had like a little collective and they were working on an idea together, right? This writers or visual artists or these other portions. And so there's these moments where the right individuals come together and they collaborate. So don't think about your creativity enhancing when you work with other people, and that it's much tougher to be creative when you're working by yourself, right? So all the social stuff, coming to events like today, being involved in your courses, I think schools have a real potential for that, right? And creativity involves iteration and feedback. And this is, I think, the thing I learned from art school. I was an undergraduate visual arts major, and um, the worst idea in the room could actually become the best idea through this iteration and feedback, right? And so in that critique process, so it's really how do you shape it? So when you get an idea and you're like listening to your friend, you're like, oh, that's a stinky idea. And it might be, but really like if you start to uncover what could it be? What could be with this idea, right? It could actually be a really good idea. So I think don't give up on these things and really trust your intuition. And these are a whole bunch of folks, if you want to take a screenshot, or I can share these slides too, of people working in the creativity literature. So if you're interested in reading more, there's, some of the research that's behind this. So we'll go a little bit deeper into each one of these big ideas. So creativity increases with exposure. So back when I was in art school, we had to make a chair that could hold 250 pounds, but only with cardboard, like large sheets of cardboard, right? And at first you're like, there's just no way to do it. But Frank Gehry, a lot of famous artists have done that, and there's all sorts of different ways to be able to support weight with cardboard, and actually you could do thousands of pounds of just cardboard. And so but what was interesting was in that course is she took pictures of all the chairs that had been created over time, and she showed them at the class, and you could see almost this creative evolution, that the chairs at the very beginning were sort of basic structures, and the chairs that 10 years later were really innovative kinds of things, and you could see an innovation keep going. And so we see this with creativity is actually we're becoming more and more creative as a society, right? We have all these solutions, all these ways of sharing. And so just know that, when you are doom scrolling or you're looking on the web, part of it is your creative exposure, but push yourself to create something with those ideas, right? So that you're not just consuming, sort of like the film critics, they consume a lot of movies, but then when they go to create their own, they've consumed almost too much, right? And they get into this creative paralysis. So that consumption has value up to a certain point. You need to start producing yourself, right? So you can, kind of, if you've got student work, or, you can get together with your friends and have like a gallery. You can create something online to show that portion. And how can everybody build? If you do this seminar next year, can you share all of the presentations so people can build on those even next year, right? Employ your AI tools to gather or generate diverse examples. So really asking it first, like, show me 10 different ways of doing this. Show me 50 different ways of doing this, right? So AI is just like Google, is a really good way to gather all the prior solutions. And then collecting and saving your work in a portfolio as a creative resource in the future is actually really important. I was talking about, if you have one pet rock, little rock that you've painted, it's not so interesting. But if you have thousands of pet rocks, right, and you get all of those pet rocks together in one room and take a picture, it's really compelling, right? Um, the creativity is malleable and not fixed. So, creativity can be developed through practice, mindset, and supportive environments. So, the divergent thinking, think of as many answers as you can before you narrow in on one. And that's actually tough, to really commit to that. If you just try to do that every day, before I decide what I'm going to eat for breakfast, I'm going to think of as many possibilities as I can. Before I get started on this homework assignment, I'm going to think about, at least 10 to 20. When I have students that are working at a dissertation, we have the 100 ideas stage. And I'll tell you, coming up with 100 ideas for a dissertation is really hard. Um, and only one person's ever done it. Most of them kind of peter out at like 23, right? You know, and and at this point, you're just trying to come up with lots of ideas. But with the support of AI, you've got a really good friend on your side. Um, and so and you could also prompt AI like, well, what if I brought together my interests, and I'm just trying to think of something pretty random, but what if I, take my interest in the K-pop Demon Hunters, and it's a movie that's really popular here in the US right now. And and my interest in dogs, right? Like what could I come up with, right? So you just take two disparate things, and at that intersection is going to be something new, this juxtaposition, right? Um, so remember to really think about that divergence before you converge on the answer. Oftentimes, just study it in a group, people will gravitate towards the very first thing that's said, right? The very first solution, the first thing that comes to mind, you'll come up with, but it's not usually the best answer, right? Play and curiosity, we talked about this open-ended exploration. So kind of allowing yourself just to play with things rather than like jumping into a serious assignment and having to have the best thing first, but like, well, just play around with the tool. What's possible? So we were just playing around with a new music making tool called Suno, so Suno, and we just put the worst prompts in. And then, we then added like, it was like, well, how about like a dog on the beach, like just something really like, who could even write a good song about this? Like, that sounds crazy, like with those paws in the sand. And um, what about like if we did like an Afro pop, thing? And I'll tell you what, it was a sticky song, right? And it was really fun. So it was just a good way to explore what's possible with this tool. And we shared it with some of the other folks, and it became kind of an inside joke, right? So just take time to be playful. And I think that's what you have on your side. This is like a hard thing for adults to do. But y'all, like younger people really kind of usually are able to do this. All right. And then we talked before about collaborating. So really kind of teaming up with your friends, thinking about these creative projects. Think about AI as your third collaborator. It can critique or extend earlier ideas together. And you can even kind of pitch things from different platforms into other platforms, co-creating with your AI. And then lastly, this creativity involves iteration and feedback. So it's not a one-shot process. It involves trying and failing and revising. So encourage your friends to fail, right? Encourage your friends to take a risk that's going to put you outside of the box, right? Like we tried to fail with that pseudo and that prompt, right? Like we were like it was like that was the goal to like do a fail safe, right? Sometimes when we're teaching um, circuitry like in the squishy circuits example, uh and one of my friends that's really good at teaching circuitry, and he always has his students blow up an LED, like to overpower it so much that they blow it up, right? Like and so we're like purposefully trying to fail. We find in learning, if you don't fail, actually you don't know how to get it right. It's like sometimes just coincidentally you got it right. So in circuitry, you probably got that light bulb turned on, but you never really failed at how not to turn it on, so you didn't get a short in that switch because all your wires were insulated. You didn't get the light bulb reverse like you would with an LED. So you didn't learn about polarity, right? So failing is really these great learning moments. And so really honor those and like really I think with your friends especially, it can be really vulnerable, right? So how can you make that a moment? Like how can you celebrate it or make it a safe space, right? Okay. So in summary, we just want to think about like with all this constant change, creativity isn't optional. It's how we adapt, how we thrive, right? And so it's not just about getting to the end of the task, right? To get to the end of the assignment, but really being a powerful partner in your storytelling, your design and discovery, and then really allowing it to be something that's really meaningful that happens, and not just that consumption. So if you're just consuming all this new media out there, how do you start producing? And turning that so that is it 50-50? Is it seven? Like ideally, I'd love to see you producing 75% of the time and consuming 25% of the time, right? Something like that, where you're producing more than you're consuming. Um, and let's think about, shaping a world really together that we're co-creating with AI and not letting your, AI think for you or handle that assignment for you. All right. Well, thank you so much all. And I'm gonna hang out if you want to kind of just chit chat or talk about anything. But I know you have a active field conference today. So